My parents always told me that my grandfather died before I was born. But one day I found an old photo of him alive and well. When I tracked him down, I uncovered a dark family secret that my parents were desperate to keep hidden. I always believed my family was ordinary. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Just regular dinners, weekend outings, and stories passed down from my parents. My mother often spoke about her childhood, but there was one person she never mentioned in detail: her father. Whenever I asked about my grandfather, the answer was always the same. He passed away before you were born. There was never a story, never a memory. Just those simple words that closed any further discussion. For years, I never questioned it. Why would I? Families have losses and some things are too painful to talk about. But one day, everything changed. While cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon an old dusty box tucked away in the corner. It was filled with faded photographs, letters, and old keepsakes. As I sifted through them, one picture caught my attention. A black and white photo of a man I had never seen before. He had a strong resemblance to my mother. My hands trembled as I turned it over. There, in faded ink, was a date from years after I was born. Confused, I took the photo to my parents. I expected them to reminisce, to explain, maybe even to smile at an old memory. But the moment my mother saw it, her face drained of color. My father immediately snatched the picture from my hand. "Where did you find this?" His voice was sharp, demanding. My mother didn't say a word, just stared at me like I had uncovered something forbidden. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. If my grandfather had passed away before I was born, how could there be a picture of him alive years later? Questions flooded my mind. Were they lying to me? Why? What could be so terrible that they never wanted me to know? I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. And so, I did the one thing my parents clearly never wanted me to do. I started searching. I looked up records, asked distant relatives, and followed every small clue I could find. Then one night, after weeks of digging, I found something that made my stomach drop. It was an address. An address linked to a man with my grandfather's name. A man who, according to official records, was still alive. I had to see for myself. I had to know the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to uncover. The address burned in my mind. A place tied to the man I had been told was long gone. It was late, and my parents were in their room, silent after our earlier conversation. My mother had barely spoken a word since seeing the photograph, and my father had been tense, his grip on the picture so tight it had almost crumpled in his hands. I knew I wouldn't get any more answers from them, at least not now. If they had been hiding this secret for so long, they wouldn't suddenly come clean. I waited until the house was completely quiet, then pulled out my laptop. My heart pounded as I typed the address into the search bar. The place wasn't far, just a couple of towns over. The search didn't bring up much, only a few basic records and a name. Franklin Carter. The name wasn't unfamiliar, but it also wasn't one I had heard often. My mother's maiden name was Carter. Could it be him? Could my grandfather really be alive all this time? I clicked on another record. It was a property listing from years ago. The house was old, a single-story home with a weathered front porch. No recent updates, no pictures of who lived there. Just an address buried in public records. The more I scrolled, the more uneasy I felt. I thought about calling the number listed, but what would I even say? Asterisk, "Hi, I think you might be my grandfather, the man my family pretended didn't exist. Can we talk?" Asterisk, it felt ridiculous. But the alternative, leaving this alone, felt impossible. The next day I couldn't focus on anything. My parents acted like nothing had happened, though I could see the way my mother's hands trembled slightly when she poured her coffee, how my father seemed more irritable than usual. I knew they were hoping I would drop it. Pretend I never saw that picture. But I couldn't. By the afternoon I made up my mind. I was going to the address. I needed to see for myself. The drive was longer than I expected. As I left my familiar neighborhood behind, the roads became quieter, lined with trees and stretches of empty land. The GPS led me to a small, almost forgotten town, the kind of place where everyone probably knew each other. My stomach twisted as I pulled onto the street. The house was exactly as I had seen in the old listing. A faded white home with a sagging porch and a rusted mailbox barely hanging on. It didn't look abandoned, but it also didn't look welcoming. For a long moment, I just sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. What if I was wrong? What if this was just a dead end? Or worse, what if I was right? Taking a deep breath, I stepped out and walked up the cracked path. I knocked on the door. My heartbeat was so loud I could barely hear anything else. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then the door creaked open. An elderly man stood in the doorway. His eyes, sharp despite his age, met mine with quiet intensity. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Can I help you?" His voice was rough, cautious. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I'm looking for Franklin Carter." His gaze didn't waver. For a second, I thought he might slam the door in my face. Instead, he exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly. "Who are you?" I hesitated. This was the moment. The second everything could change. "My name is Daniel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think you might be my grandfather." The silence that followed was unbearable. The man's expression hardened, and for a moment I was sure he would deny it, tell me I had the wrong person. But then something shifted in his eyes, something that looked like recognition, like pain. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The words sent a chill through me. "Please," I said quickly. "I just want to know the truth. My parents never talk about you. They told me you died before I was born, but I found this." I pulled out my phone and showed him the scanned photo. "This was taken years after they said you were gone." His eyes flickered to the screen, and for the briefest moment, I saw something in his face, a crack in the guarded expression. Then just as quickly he looked away. "They told you I was dead?" His voice was almost a whisper. I nodded. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past me, as if scanning the street for something, or someone. Then he sighed, stepping back. "Come inside." I hesitated, glancing back at my car, but I had already come this far. Taking a deep breath, I stepped in. The house was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old books and something faintly metallic. The furniture was old but well kept, the walls lined with framed photographs, none of which included my mother or anyone I recognized. I turned back to face him. Why did they lie to me? He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing his temples like he was piecing together a story he hadn't told in years. "Because they wanted to protect you," he said finally. "From what?" His eyes met mine again, and this time there was no mistaking the sorrow in them. "From the truth." A heavy silence hung between us. My chest tightened. "What truth?" I pressed, my voice firmer now. He exhaled slowly, glancing toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. For the first time since I arrived, something like fear crossed his face. "There are things about this family, about your parents, that you don't know. Things they never wanted you to find out." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Like what?" His fingers drummed against the counter, hesitating. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I tell you, there's no going back." I swallowed hard. "I need to know." He studied me for a long moment before nodding to the hallway. "Come with me." Every instinct told me this was the point of no return. But I had already started down this path, and there was no way I was stopping now. I followed him toward the closed door, my breath shallow. As his hand hovered over the handle, he glanced at me one last time. "Are you sure you want to know?" I nodded. The door creaked open, and what I saw inside changed everything. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with old filing cabinets, stacks of yellowed papers, and a single desk pushed against the wall. The air smelled of dust and something older, like history sealed away for too long. My grandfather stepped inside, his posture stiff, as if the weight of whatever he was about to reveal had been pressing on him for years. I hesitated on the threshold, my pulse pounding in my ears. This was the moment I had been chasing, but now that I was standing here, staring into the unknown, a small part of me whispered that I might not be ready for the truth. My grandfather turned to face me, closed the door. The way he said it sent a chill through me. I swallowed hard and did as he said. The soft click of the latch felt louder than it should have. "This is where it starts," he said, motioning to the mess of paper spread across the desk. "The truth your parents never wanted you to know." I stepped forward, my eyes scanning the papers, but I didn't understand what I was looking at. Some were handwritten notes, others looked like legal documents, and there were even old photographs, ones my parents had never kept in our house. My grandfather picked up a picture and held it out to me. "Recognize this?" I took it, my fingers trembling slightly. It was a group photo taken decades ago. My mother was in it, much younger, maybe in her early 20s. My father was beside her, along with several other people I didn't recognize. But it wasn't their presence that made my breath hitch. It was the man standing beside my mother. It was him. My grandfather. But something was off. The way my mother was standing, the look in her eyes. It wasn't the same warm, loving expression I was used to. She looked uneasy, like she didn't want to be there. I looked up at him. "What is this?" He exhaled slowly. "This was the last time I saw your mother before she cut me out of her life." My grip on the photo tightened. "Why?" His jaw clenched and he ran a hand down his face. "Because of what I knew." I swallowed hard. "What did you know?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes locked on the stack of papers. Then he finally spoke. "Your parents have spent years building the life they wanted you to believe in, the version of reality they wanted to keep you trapped inside. But the truth is messy and dangerous." I frowned. "Dangerous?" He nodded. "The day your mother walked away from me, she told me she would never let you find out the truth, that she would do whatever it took to keep you from knowing." The words sent a shiver down my spine. My mother, the woman who had always been gentle and loving, had gone to such lengths to erase her own father from existence? It didn't make sense. "But why?" I pressed. "What could be so bad that she had to cut you out of our lives?" He reached for a folder on the desk, hesitated for just a second, then handed it to me. "Read it." I flipped it open. Inside were copies of letters with my mother's handwriting. Some addressed to my grandfather, others to names I didn't recognize. My eyes darted across the words, trying to make sense of them. Then one sentence caught my attention. Asterisk, we can't let him find out. If he ever asks, we tell him the same story. Dad is gone. He's dead. That's the only way to protect him. Asterisk, my stomach dropped. They've been lying to me my entire life, I whispered. My grandfather nodded, his expression unreadable. I turned the page. There were more letters, each one more unsettling than the last. Mentions of cover-ups, of secrets buried so deep even distant family members were in on it. I could barely breathe as I pieced it together. It wasn't just about cutting you out, I said slowly, looking up at him. They were hiding something bigger. His eyes darkened. Yes. I clenched my fists, frustration bubbling inside me. Then tell me, please. What is it? What did they do? He hesitated again. That same flicker of fear crossed his face, like he was weighing whether I was ready for this. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. It's not just about me, Daniel. It's about you. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Me? He nodded. You weren't supposed to find out, because if you did, everything they've built, everything they've done, it would all come undone. My chest tightened. What are you saying? He hesitated, then reached for another paper. This one wasn't a letter. It was a record. A birth record. My birth record. I frowned. What is this? His voice was quiet but firm. Look at the names. I did. My parents' names were there, but something was wrong. There was another name listed, one I didn't recognize. A name under guardian. I looked up, my heart hammering. What does this mean? My grandfather exhaled. It means that everything you thought you knew about your past might not be the truth. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. My hands trembled as I placed the paper back on the desk. Are you saying they're not my real parents? He didn't answer right away. And that silence, that hesitation, it told me everything. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, that's not possible. They raised me. I have pictures with them since I was a baby. They built a life for you. My grandfather interrupted softly. But not in the way you think. I wanted to deny it, wanted to push it all away. But deep down, something in me had already begun unraveling. Every vague answer they had given me, every time they had brushed off questions about my grandfather, every moment that had felt slightly off, it all suddenly made sense. I backed away toward the door, my head spinning. I need to go. Daniel, my grandfather called after me. But I was already reaching for the doorknob. My world was collapsing around me, and I couldn't stand to be in that room any longer. I burst out into the hallway, barely remembering how I had even gotten into this house. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The walls felt like they were caving in, the air too thick. I stumbled out the front door, gulping in fresh air, but it didn't help. My whole life had just been turned upside down, and I had no idea what to do next. One thing was clear, my parents had been hiding something about me, and I wasn't stopping until I found out what it was. The drive back home was a blur. My mind raced through every conversation, every childhood memory, every moment that now felt tainted with doubt. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The streetlights blurred past me, their glow flickering like ghosts in the dark. I had gone looking for my grandfather, but instead I had found something far more disturbing. My parents had lied to me my whole life, and now I wasn't even sure who I was. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my heart was hammering in my chest. The house was dark except for the dim glow of the kitchen light. For a second, I considered walking in like nothing had happened, pretending I hadn't just unearthed a family secret that could change everything. But I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The quiet was suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the house settling. Then a voice. You went looking, didn't you? I turned and there she was. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression unreadable. My father was behind her, silent, watching me carefully. For a moment no one spoke. The air between us was thick, charged with something heavy and unspoken. You told me he was dead, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. All these years you made me believe that. Why? My mother let out a slow breath, rubbing her temples. Daniel, it's complicated. No, I snapped, stepping closer. It's not. Either you lied to me or you didn't. My father sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. We did what we had to do. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Like there was no regret. No guilt. Just acceptance. I shook my head. You mean you did what was best for you? Not me. My mother's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. That silence told me everything. I pulled the folded birth record from my pocket and slammed it onto the counter. Explain this. My mother stiffened. My father's jaw clenched. Neither of them moved. I went to see him, I continued, my voice trembling. I saw the letters, the records. You weren't just lying about him. You were hiding something about me. My mother's eyes flickered to my father. The silent exchange between them made my skin crawl. It was as if they were trying to decide what to say, or how much they could still keep from me. Tell me the truth, I demanded. Right now. My mother inhaled sharply, and for the first time I saw it, the fear in her eyes. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. My father was the one who spoke. You were never supposed to find out. The floor felt unsteady beneath me. Find out what? Another silence. My mother's fingers trembled as she reached for the paper, running her hand over the words like she was searching for an answer she couldn't find. Then she finally spoke. We weren't supposed to have you. The words sent a bolt of electricity through my body. What? I whispered. She swallowed hard, closing her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, they were glassy, unreadable. We didn't adopt you in the way you think. A cold sweat broke out over my skin. What does that mean? My father exhaled heavily. It means your grandfather wasn't lying to you. Your past isn't what you think it is. I shook my head. That doesn't make any sense. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel, we weren't supposed to be your parents. The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. No, I said quickly, shaking my head. No. That's impossible. You were given to us, my father said. For your own safety. The words rang in my ears, hollow and distant. Given to them. Like I wasn't theirs to begin with. Like I had been placed into their care. By who? I choked out. Neither of them spoke. My hands curled into fists. Asterisk by who? Asterisk, my mother's gaze flickered downward, and my father turned away, rubbing his forehead like he couldn't bear to say it. Then my mother whispered, by him. I sucked in a sharp breath. My grandfather, the room felt like it was closing in. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs. He gave me to you? I asked, my voice breaking. My mother nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And we did everything we could to protect you. The walls felt too tight, the air too thin. My whole life, every memory, every truth I thought I knew. It was all unraveling in front of me. But the worst part? I still didn't know why, and as I stared at my parents, at the fear in their eyes, I realized something chilling. Whatever they had been hiding, whatever had made them erase my grandfather from existence, it wasn't just about the past. It was about something bigger. Something they were still afraid of. Something I wasn't supposed to survive knowing. The room felt suffocating. My mother's words echoed in my head, each syllable sinking deeper into my chest. Asterisk, he gave you to us. For your safety, asterisk, the phrase looped over and over, but no matter how I turned it, no matter how I tried to make sense of it, it only led to more questions. I took a slow step back, my pulse hammering. Why? My voice was barely a whisper. Why would he need to give me away? My father ran a hand down his face, looking exhausted, as if years of secrecy were suddenly pressing down on him. My mother hesitated before speaking again. Because you weren't supposed to be ours, she said softly. You weren't supposed to be his either. A chill shot through me. What do you mean? She swallowed hard, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. Because, she whispered, her voice trembling, your real parents were never supposed to exist. My breath hitched. The words didn't make sense. My real parents. Who were they? And what did she mean, never supposed to exist? I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to sit down. You're saying, I'm not actually your son. She flinched, and for a moment I saw something crack in her. Something raw, something she had been holding back for years. You are my son, she said quickly, her voice thick with emotion. We raised you. We loved you. But the truth is, you were placed with us. Not out of love. Out of necessity. My stomach twisted. The walls felt too close, my own breathing too loud in my ears. I turned to my father, but he couldn't even meet my gaze. He was staring at the floor, as if this entire conversation was something he had spent years trying to avoid. I felt like I was floating, disconnected from reality, like none of this was really happening. Then who were they? I asked, my voice unsteady. My real parents? My mother inhaled sharply. They were people who got caught in something they shouldn't have. My heart pounded harder. What does that mean? She hesitated. My father finally looked up, his expression unreadable. It means, he said quietly, that they were people who knew too much. People who were erased. The word sent a violent shudder through me. Erased? I shook my head. No, I swallowed hard. That's not possible. But the way my mother looked at me, the sadness, the pain, the guilt, it told me it was. They disappeared, she said softly. And no one ever asked questions. A deep cold fear curled around my spine. My skin prickled with a terrible realization. And you were supposed to make sure I disappeared too. Neither of them answered. But they didn't have to. The truth was there, hanging in the air, unspoken. They were supposed to make sure I never asked, never looked, never found what had been buried. I stumbled back, the room spinning. This wasn't just about family secrets. This wasn't just about my grandfather being erased from my life. This was something else. Something much bigger. Something dangerous. I turned away, my breathing uneven, my hands shaking. My mind was racing, piecing things together, but I still didn't have the full picture. I needed to go back. I needed to see my grandfather again. I spun around. I'm leaving. My mother reached out. Daniel, please. I pulled away. You kept this from me my whole life. You made me believe something that wasn't true. And now you want me to just accept it." Tears welled in her eyes. "We were trying to protect you." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You were protecting yourselves." My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. I turned and walked out the door. The cold air hit me like a slap as I rushed to my car, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the keys. My heart was racing so fast I could barely focus. My parents had been lying to me my entire life. My real parents had been erased, and my grandfather, he knew everything. I had to go back. The drive felt like it took hours, though I knew it was only minutes. By the time I reached my grandfather's house, my hands were still trembling. The house looked exactly the same as before, quiet, dark, isolated. But something felt off. I stepped out of the car, the night pressing in around me. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Silence. I knocked again. "Grandpa, it's me." "It's Daniel." No answer. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I reached for the doorknob, turned easily, unlocked. I hesitated, my pulse thudding against my ribs. Then I pushed the door open. The inside was still. Too still. The living room was empty. The desk where he had shown me the letters and documents, empty. The papers, the records, gone. My throat tightened. "Grandpa," I called, stepping forward. No response. I walked down the hallway, past the dimly lit rooms until I reached the last door. The one he had led me to before. It was open now. And inside the room was empty. Not just empty, cleared out. As if someone had come in and erased everything. Panic shot through me. I spun around, my breath coming in short gasps. "Grandpa!" Silence. I rushed to the kitchen, to the back door. It was slightly open, the curtain swaying from the night breeze. I stepped outside, my pulse hammering. Then I saw it. Tire tracks. Deep fresh. Leading away from the house. Someone had been here. Someone had taken him. I staggered back, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a secret. This wasn't just some buried past. This was active, it was still happening. And whoever had erased my parents, whoever had tried to erase me, had just come back. The realization was suffocating. I wasn't just uncovering something old. I was walking straight into something dangerous. Something alive. Something that wasn't finished yet. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the empty space where my grandfather had been. The house felt hollow, stripped of everything that could have explained what was happening. The tire tracks outside were fresh, the damp earth still pressed down in deep grooves. Someone had taken him. Someone who didn't want me to know the truth. I turned back to the house, searching for anything they might have missed. Every room was eerily still. But then I noticed something, the faintest scrap of paper sticking out from beneath the living room rug. I yanked it free, my hands shaking. It was a torn corner of a letter, smudged with hurried writing. Asterisk, if you're reading this, they've come. Do not trust. Asterisk, the message cut off. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Do not trust who? A car engine rumbled in the distance. My breath hitched. I moved quickly, ducking low, peeking through the window. A black SUV crawled down the street, slow and deliberate, as if searching for something. For me. I grabbed the paper, shoved it into my pocket, and bolted out the back door. My car was too obvious. I needed to get away without being seen. My feet pounded against the pavement as I slipped into the alley behind the house, my pulse hammering so loudly it drowned out everything else. I reached my car only when the SUV had turned the corner. With shaky hands, I started the engine and pulled out, careful not to draw attention. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. 15 minutes later, I was parked outside my parents' house, my heart pounding. They had spent years feeding me lies, rewriting history and hiding my past. But now I was done asking. Now I was demanding the truth. I didn't knock. I shoved the door open and stormed inside. My parents were in the living room, their faces going pale the moment they saw me. "Where is he?" I demanded. My mother's eyes widened. "Daniel, asterisk, where is he?" Asterisk, I shouted, my voice raw. They looked at each other, panic flashing between them. My father stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We don't know." I threw the torn paper onto the coffee table. "They took him. And he left me this." My mother picked up the note with trembling fingers, her face turning ashen. My father rubbed his forehead, muttering something under his breath. "He knew this would happen," I said, my voice shaking. "That's why he was trying to tell me everything before it was too late. But now he's gone." I took a step closer, my fists clenched. "And I want to know why." My father exhaled sharply, then sat down, his shoulders slumping. He looked exhausted, like a man who had been running from something for too long. "Your real parents," he said finally, his voice heavy, "weren't supposed to be together." I frowned. "What?" He glanced at my mother, and for the first time I saw tears slip down her face. "They weren't just random people who disappeared, Daniel," she whispered. "They were involved in something bigger than us. And they paid the price for it." A chill settled over me. What were they involved in? My father's fingers drummed against his knee. They uncovered something they weren't supposed to. Something powerful people didn't want exposed. And when they wouldn't stay quiet, they were erased. I took a shaky breath, trying to process it all. And my grandfather? My mother wiped her eyes. He tried to stop it. He tried to keep them safe. When he couldn't. He took you and hid you the only way he could. A sick feeling spread through me. By giving me to you. My father nodded. If they knew you existed, you would have been next. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the chest. Everything made sense now. Why they lied. Why they kept my grandfather from me. Why they made me believe a story that wasn't true. They had been trying to protect me. But now the past had come back. And whoever had taken my grandfather, whoever had been watching me, knew that I was uncovering the truth. My breath came in uneven gasps. We have to find him. My mother's eyes were pleading. Daniel, if they've taken him, it's already too late. No, I shook my head. I'm not giving up on him. He didn't give up on me. My father hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A key. He handed it to me. This is the last thing he left behind, he said. It's for a storage unit outside town. We never opened it. We didn't want to know. I stared at the key. My pulse quickened. Then I'll find out for you. The drive to the storage facility was agonizing. Every second felt like I was running out of time. The place was deserted. The metal doors lined up like silent secrets waiting to be unearthed. I found the unit number, slid the key into the lock, and yanked it open. Inside it was dark, dusty, and filled with old boxes. My heart pounded as I pulled them open. Documents, newspaper clippings, photos, everything my parents had tried to keep buried. I rifled through them, my fingers trembling. One newspaper article caught my eye. Asterisk, local couple found dead after leaking sensitive documents. Case closed. Asterisk, a photograph was attached. A man and a woman smiling, holding a baby. I nearly dropped it. It was me, my real parents. Tears burned my eyes. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been silenced. Then in the corner of the box I saw it. A small black flip phone. I grabbed it, my hands shaking as I opened it. There was only one number saved. I pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then someone answered. A voice I didn't recognize. Low. Dangerous. We were wondering when you'd find us. The line went dead. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just watching. They were waiting. And now they knew exactly where I was. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the line went dead. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller. The air heavier. My fingers tightened around the phone. They knew I had found the truth. They had been waiting for me to uncover it, knowing that sooner or later, I would piece everything together. I forced myself to breathe, my mind racing. My parents had spent their entire lives keeping me safe from these people. My grandfather had risked everything to protect me. And now he was gone, taken, erased just like my real parents. I had followed the trail they left behind and now I was next. But something was different this time. They had been in control before, manipulating the story, hiding the past. But now I knew the truth. And that gave me power. I grabbed as many documents as I could and rushed back to my car. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. My mind replaying the voice on the phone. We were wondering when you'd find us. It wasn't a threat. It was a confirmation. I drove back home, my heart pounding, my chest tightening with every second. When I walked in, my parents were still in the living room waiting. I dropped the papers on the table. I know everything, I said. They looked at me silent. My mother wiped her eyes, my father exhaled slowly. What now? My father asked. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everything. We don't run, I said. We fight. For the first time, my father nodded. My mother reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. No more lies. No more hiding. I wasn't going to be erased. Not now. Not ever.